South Africa, we're now moving to Italy. And we have found as the Old Vine Conference that our Italian engagement is very strong. We have a lot of individual Italian wineries who have joined as members. And when we were talking about we were talking in the chat from the conference yesterday, and there was a comment that Italian wineries are actually among the forefront of recognizing and protecting heritage and viticultural heritage. But we also had a bit of a paradox in that we found that when we were looking at the number of entries in the Old Vine Registry, for example, Italy was very underrepresented. But what we wanted to do today was invite we've got two leading producers from Italy, and I'm going to speak with them about their Old Vine projects and draw from that discussion some learnings and suggestions for really how and why Italy is such a strong promoter of Old Vine heritage. I'm going to be joined in this by our amazing regional ambassador for Italy, Michele Shah. Hi, Michele.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you. Nice to see everybody.
And I'd just like to say a little bit about the role of regional ambassadors within the Old Vine Conference. So the Old Vine Conference is a non-profit, and we are really fortunate in that the aims of the non-profit attracts the engagement of extremely passionate and clever people who give their time to share our message and to connect us with great Old Vine practitioners. Michele is our regional ambassador for Italy and has been enormously proactive and inspiring in attracting Italian wineries to join. Michele, why is it that you think the Old Vine story, the Old Vine sort of heritage is so powerful in Italy? And why do so many great producers in Italy focus on old vineyards?
Well, thank you, Sarah, and thanks for inviting me. Well, I think Italy has an abundance of pockets of old vines, and just by history, by culture, by the viticultural heritage that it has. And we also have so many different regions in Italy, and you can find pockets of these old vines from the north to the south. And of course, there are some areas like Etna, like Sardinia, which probably have more older vines than other regions. This is really probably because of their viticultural history. And I think the producers that we have are wonderful authoritative wineries that are actually seen as leaders in their industry, whether small or larger, and are great advocates of the movement and what the membership is about, and of safeguarding the genetic and cultural heritage and history of the vineyards.
I can see that our Italian wineries have arrived. Michele, would you like to introduce us to our speakers?
Well, with great pleasure. Now we have Salvino Benanti from Benanti Winery, who together actually with his twin brother, Antonio Benanti, are the owners and carrying on the heritage of their father, who's Giuseppe Benanti, and they're based in Etna. And we have also Anselmo Guerrieri Gonzaga of San Leonardo. And well, I mean, both wineries I've known for many years and have a great respect for, and it's wonderful to have them here and to have them as members of the Old Vine Conference.
So we have a little bit of sort of from the top of Italy almost to the...
That's right. And I forgot to say, sorry, San Leonardo. I presume everybody knows where Benanti is and where San Leonardo is, but San Leonardo is from Trentino. So we've got the extreme top of Italy, the Dolomites, and we have Etna from Sicily.
Fantastic. Well, what we'd like to do, thank you so much for joining us, Salvino and Anselmo, and thank you also for your strong support for the Old Vine Conference. It's really wonderful to see you engaging with this global community of fellow believers in old vines. And it's also been wonderful for us to be able to show some of your wines in tastings and so on. There's nothing more electric than getting a room full of great old vine wines for people to try. So what we'd like to do is ask, first of all, Anselmo to share some details of your project and your approach.
Thank you, Sarah.
And then we'll ask Salvino to do the same. And then what we'd like to do is talk through the sort of the similarities and also maybe diversifications in your approach, and then talk a bit more generally about the old vine situation in Italy. So if I could pass over onto you first, Anselmo, and we look forward to hearing what you're up to.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Michele. It's a great pleasure to be part of the Old Vine Conference. As I think all producers around the world, we know how important old vines are and the incredibly complex wines they are able to create, and this makes a huge difference then in the final wines and the final products we create. Obviously, maintaining these vines has become a challenge. It's not easy at all, and we have a lot of worries for the future, and our mission obviously is to try to make them as old as possible. So San Leonardo, I have a very small presentation just to give you, I will share my screen, just to give you an idea of our estate and how, can you see the screen? Perfect. And how our variety, which is Carmenère, is the vines which are the eldest in the estate. So Carmenère was planted probably by my great-great-grandfather around the end of the 1800s. He was diplomatic around Europe and very enthusiastic about wines. And every time he was traveling, he was asking the cities where he was going to send back not only the wines, but also the vines, to create a small collection in San Leonardo, and then to produce some micro-vinifications, we would call them today, but at the time I would call it wine for home. And Carmenère is a variety which has been rediscovered very recently by my father, actually, because up to 1989, all these Carmenère vines were thought to be Cabernet Franc. So the culture of vines back in the 60s, the 70s, up to the 80s was not as we know it today. And definitely today we have plunged very deeply into the culture of ampelography as well, not only in the wine, but obviously where it is coming out from. Carmenère, as I was saying, is a very old plant. So you can see it in the picture because in autumn it is very clear how it becomes, as it becomes orange and red. And the other vines you can see, which are yellow and green, are Cabernet Sauvignon of different ages. So obviously plants which are very young age, let's say, get into autumn later, and plants which are older get into autumn slightly earlier. You can see the red plants, and right in the central part of the screen here, in the central parts of the screen, you can see this 1 hectare of plants which are between 70 and 75 years old, which are the heart of our production. So you can see them here. It's Carmenère trained in pergola doppia, so double pergola, we call it in Trentino. It's the classic way of growing grapes in Trentino. These are very wide pergolas of about 5 meters, 30, I would say, with a density of about 1,760 plants per hectare. The yields are quite high because pergola, you cannot constrain it to become like a sort of bonsai. You can see here in my hands an old plant of about 70 years old, which unfortunately died last summer. And this winter, we took it out of the field. We have been recreating our own clonal selection through this last decade, and we have since then, I would say, found about 7 prototypes of plants which have become the new vegetal material in order for us to recreate older plants. Not all the plants, but to recreate the taste of San Leonardo, because obviously I would say that today we have many great wines, but wines with identity are less, and wines with identity certainly come more out of older plants. But as well, we have to maintain varieties which maybe were slightly less productive, or which had other kind of problematics, and this gives us the opportunity to try to maintain the taste. So in the summer, Carmenere is very vivid. It makes many leaves. It has a beautiful history. I want just to show here. You have a nice plant of Carmenere towards harvest time. It is so that the story was that when my father bought some new Cabernet Franc, because he wanted to widen up the amount of this grape, which was making our wines better and better, he bought some new Cabernet Franc from France, and then all of a sudden, after 2 years, he realized that it was a completely different variety. So we called in Attilio Scienza, who is Professor Attilio Scienza, a fantastic gentleman, which is a scientist really, as his family name says. And he said to us, well, you have some Carmenere here, and it is really rare by now. In fact, Carmenere had disappeared nearly completely from Bordeaux, where it is originating from, at the end of the 1800s, after the phylloxera. And when the vines were replanted, probably Carmenere had disappeared because it was not very productive. In Trentino, having the pergola, Carmenere found an ideal place where to develop and to produce lots of grapes. So we have to always remember that a great cultivator about 40, 50 years ago was not the one who was making the best wine, but the one who was making more grapes. Because obviously we have to imagine that this was the reality of the wine world. Today we talk about wine in a hedonistic way. Back then it was part of our diet, diet so-called in the sense of what we were eating, and it was calories. And so the more they were making, the better it was. In Trentino, the pergola system was introduced because underneath the vines you could grow a lot of vegetables. So this is obviously promiscuous cultivations. Today we have a very monocultivar orientation besides woods. But back then the cultivation methods were variegated. So as you can see, this is a vineyard planted around 1950, 1953. We do not have a precise, let's say, date of this vine, but definitely it was around that date. Obviously, you must imagine that today, when vines suffer of a large disease, we tend to take away the whole hectare or the whole portion. Back then, it was a replanting. So in these vines, you can find younger plants and older plants, but the majority is still of this age. The quality of this of the wine arising from the quality of the vines arising from let me just stop there we go. The quality arising from these wines is absolutely fantastic, and this is the quality given from the complexity that an old vine is capable of releasing. And it's not just something you can find on the extract, on the polyphenols. So it's not just something that you can measure so easily. I think that what is so fascinating of wine in general is that we have so much data, but it's very difficult to put taste in data. So obviously you have these major characters that you can see on a analytical point of view, but then the quality and the emotion that a great wine can give you is not something measurable. And until it will not be measurable, it will be part of this mystery, which makes us all be wine lovers, I would say. The yields, as I said, are quite high. We go from 80 to 100 quintals per hectare. Obviously, these are all vineyards that you have to work manually. Pergola has no systems of mechanization, except for defeuillage, but which we do not make because it tends to concentrate then the fruit. So the objective in Leonardo is to try to create wines which are elegant, very elegant, and with lower alcohol. Mm. And what we have seen in these last 20 years since defeuillage, mechanical defeuillage has come on the pergola, is that it tends to concentrate too much the alcohol level, and this is not what we look for.
And Anselmo, could you tell us which wines you make from your old vines? Do you make do you focus on a single old vine cuvée, or do you prefer to use your old vine fruit across your range?
So Carmenère, the old vine is used mainly for the San Leonardo, and where in the cuvée there is a 30%. So it's not a huge amount. We produce about 65 quintals per hectare, 65,000 bottles of San Leonardo, up to 70,000 on the top vintages. So a 30% comes from, apart from this old vine, and of course we have many other fields planted in Carmenère, some which are 30, 40 years old. And some which have been just planted, of course. So you have the whole range. But then from this old vine, half of it is dedicated when it's very productive vintage to a single vineyard, which is our Carmenère. It's a pure wine called Carmenère. Actually, I have not prepared even an image of the label, but it's a very lovely wine, I must say. And it was bottled for the first time in purely, let's say, as a single cru in 2007. Actually, I had to bottle it, hiding it from my father because he didn't want me to make new wines when I was younger. And he was very, let's say, jealous of the winemaking now. But I think he wanted to protect also his San Leonardo, which is definitely our greatest wine. But so with the director, we bought 1,724 magnums of glass, and we bottled this wine secretly. And then after 5 or 6 years, I think, we presented it to my father, all wrapped around with some paper, saying that it was a fantastic wine from Bordeaux. And so he tasted, and actually he immediately said, "Oh, this reminds me so much of the Carmenère we have on our pergola." And so we had to tell him that it was the truth. And once he saw the results aged, and he said, "Well, absolutely, we have to put this wine on the market." And we said, "Well, it's ready, you know." We made already a few magnums of it, and so that's when it started. But really, the character of this wine is unique, and it is absolutely thanks to the old vines. We have one vineyard just next to it. As I have shown you in the previous picture, you have seen quite a big parcel of Carmenère in Guyot, for example, and the taste is very different. I mean, obviously you recognize the variety. It's a great wine, but it does not have that kick, that uniqueness, that also that more savage, if you want, a wild note that Carmenère, especially grown in pergola, can give.
Thank you, Anselmo. And it's and I believe your wines are imported into the UK by Berkman now.
By Berkman, it's exactly.
Yes, excellent.
Berkman is our.
And I'm sure that Salvino, you've heard things that have both resonated with you or made you think of your own practices in contrast. But would you also like to give us like an overview of your project at Benanti in Etna, and then we can all talk together about the implications. We've also got some really good questions being asked, which I will bring up at the end as well.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. We are equally excited to be part of the project. We've been working with old vines since the very beginning of this winery's modern phase, which started in the 80s. We are keen supporters of the old vine movement because old vines are a testimony to the past, and they prove that a certain region has a long history and tradition. I too have a few slides, so I will share my screen right now. Hopefully it works. Just a second. Yeah, there you go. Can you see them? Yeah, okay. This is me on a good day. My twin brother and I run the winery, which was founded by our father, Giuseppe. A few words about us, very briefly. In this photograph, you can see my father, Giuseppe, who recently left us. He was the first person almost 40 years ago to invest seriously in fine winemaking from indigenous grape varieties. So a lot of credit is given to him by wine commentators for his pioneering work. Today on Etna, there are a few hundred producers producing very fine wines made from our autochthonous grapes, but he's credited for being the first mover, the first person who really believed in our local grapes. Today, my brother and I run the winery. We are recognized as one of the leaders locally. I would say we're a medium-sized winery because we've grown to a size of 250,000, which is our current size. We export most of it, like many Italian wineries, and our wine can be found in all the most prestigious wine markets. So we're very, very happy with the reception that Etna Wines is getting in all the world's most important markets. As we speak, I'm in Oslo at our importers' offices, and things are going very well happening in Scandinavia as well. So there is a lot of recognition in fine markets being given to Etna Wines. What is Etna? Very, very briefly. Etna is a small appellation. It only represents 5% of Sicilian wines, and it must never be confused with Sicily. We are a very different terroir. We are a tall, active volcano reaching 3,300 meters. We have, therefore, our own climate, which is a cool climate with huge diurnal range, which is ideal for fine winemaking. It's an active volcano. You'll see a few photos of some eruptions and understand why so many new ashes and minerals are scattered on our vines pretty much every year. Our soils are volcanic sand. So we really make mountain wines. And we always make this point very clear, because when somebody drinks wines from Mount Etna, they must wear their elegant wines hat and nothing else. We are nicknamed a north in the south because despite the Mediterranean latitude, we make wines at very high elevations, and therefore we can achieve a lot of elegance. A few photos. So we are a mountain by the sea, snow very frequent. This is a typical month of February up on Etna. This is the east side of Etna facing the Ionian Sea. We are at about 800 meters here. So our cool climate is very different from the rest of the island. This is the way we grow our vines. We have lava stone walls to cope with the slope and the very sort of dramatic gradient of the flanks of the volcano, and the craters just looming behind us constantly. We're constantly reminded of where we are. We have presence of ungrafted century-old vines. I must say, unfortunately, not so many, but some have been salvaged, have been rescued. And those who are fortunate enough to have a few of these, they make very fine wine from them. This, what you can see multiple times a year on Etna. It's not nice when you're landing in Catania and this happens. Usually you don't really get much of a notice. So sometimes you have to be ready to for your flight to land somewhere else, down in Malta, back U-turn and go towards Calabria or the other side of Sicily, Palermo. So a bit challenging sometimes. It gets worse when, in addition to smoke, we have lava. So this is also a very typical scene for us. This is our eastern vineyard in Contrada Rinazzo in the town of Milo. Now, what you see is the southeast crater, the most active crater on Etna. On average, you get multiple eruptions a month. Sometimes they only last a few hours. And if they're during the day, you don't really notice them. The lava you see looks quite threatening, but it cools off in a valley, which seems to have been designed by a very sort of godly hand to stop the lava. So we see it, we can approach it, we can almost touch it, but it rarely does any damage. On the other hand, it creates a lot of awareness around Etna and a big show. So we have a lot of people that come to Etna just to see that, and then they stop by the wineries. So that's lovely. We make 2 wines from old vines, and they are both Etna Rosso Riservas. Sometimes I say they're vinified like a Brunello di Montalcino because we aged them for 5 years, 2 years in tank, 2 years in large oak barrels, and 1 year in the bottle. So the current vintage is 2022, and in a few days we will release, current vintage is 2018, and we will release the current vintage is 2017, but in a few days we will release 2018. Yeah, 5 years after harvest, late October, early November. The grape is Nerello Mascalese. It's a grape that has now gained some prominence and notoriety, but it's really in the last 30-40 years that this grape has sort of shown itself on the world stage, because it's typical of Mount Etna, and Mount Etna is a region which has only come to be to the attention of international wine commentators in the last few decades. Nerello Mascalese is a elegant wine which sits somewhere in between a Pinot Noir and a Nebbiolo, probably, in terms of color, in terms of sort of characteristics. So the pale, elegant color, we speak usually of small strawberries, dry flowers, herbs, graphite, and smoky resinous aromas. Very dry, mineral, great acidity, and very elegant tannins. We have 2 separate plots, which and we named the wine after the plot. So our northern Riserva is called Rovitello. That's the area, and the plot is number 341, 2,500 bottles produced only. And our southern Riserva is Serra della Contessa from plot 5 at 7, and again it's only 6,000 square meters of Alberello bush vines, and again we produce just over 2,200, 2,300 bottles. Sometimes we skip vintages. For example, this year we have decided to skip the production of this wine. So it's the very top of our range, which only reaches the market when it's at its very best in terms of aging and in terms of vintage. I will maybe stop sharing. I think you can now see me. And we're incredibly proud to be able to bring a very old tradition, such as the goblet style freestanding bush vines, which were brought to us by the Greek at a time when Sicily was part of Magna Graecia, sort of the broader Greece. And so the kind of culture that we have on Etna is high density plantings with very low yields. We produce about 5,000 to 6,000 kilos of grape per hectare. And obviously, we aim for the best possible quality. So we prune. We have to be very careful with yields because these vines are very stubborn. They will produce a lot if you do not tame them. Obviously, no irrigation. This is unallowed by the Etna appellation. And a lot of manual work, hardly any mechanization. We sometimes struggle with finding proper labor. We discussed this offline. This is the #1 challenge these days, probably all over Italy, finding skilled workers. Contrary to Northern Italy, we struggle to attract immigration, so we have to rely purely on the locals. who sometimes do not have the willingness to break their back in a vineyard. So the challenge for the future is to make sure that we grow a new generation of skilled workers to tend to these vines in a very specific and way, just as they deserve. In general, old vines on Etna are frequent. Unfortunately, not all of them belong to professional wineries. Some just happen to sit in someone's backyard or abandoned plot in the middle of nowhere, and they're just not looked after. So they die. They die due to lack of care. They die due to lack of attention. So or sometimes they're uprooted. They're uprooted to make room for more efficient ways of planting. So if you're not a professional vintner who understands the value of old vines, but you're just the average farmer who wants to sell grapes, you may decide to uproot those old vines because it's a lot of work for very low yield. So we have to preserve that. We have to sort of buy those plots or engage them in a more efficient way to make sure that this heritage is preserved, because the quality of the grape you get from these old vines, ungrafted or non-ungrafted, is incredible. After several decades of producing grapes, they have sort of found the best sort of way to manage themselves and preserve themselves from what can be very, very tough climatic conditions out there, and produce small quantities of highly concentrated grapes with a lot of elegance and acidity. And our duty is just to make sure that that shows in the glass, trying to intervene only when necessary, and to make very precise, pure, clean wines that bring the grape into the glass in the most honest possible way. I can't hear you.
I was on mute. The refrain of the age. Thank you so much, both of you, for taking us through your old vine project. I mean, for me, there's a couple of things that really stand out and that I feel are very emblematic of Italy, and when it comes to old vines in Italy. And the first is that I think, especially in Italy, old vines have a kind of a muse effect. You know, they really inspire great commitment and investment and passion from top producers, and that the way these old vines are holding not only quality potential, but also this sense of beauty and heritage. I think there's something in that which is really embedded in a certain spirit of Italy. And that's something that I think that I noticed in both of your stories. I mean, obviously, you've both got quite different approaches to old vines. So on Etna, you have a real focus on the single vineyard, on the Nerello Mascalese. In Trentino, Anselmo, it's almost like an adopted variety, but that's become very localized, and which you use really to almost backlight the quality of your top wines. And we see both of these approaches in Italy. And actually, Michele, you've been I should say Michele is a maven for Italian wine, and I'm very grateful to be working with you, because you've taught me a lot about Italian wine. But I think this kind of having a very diverse approach to making old wines sing is also very Italian, because, you know, having a very individualistic idea of what you want to create, I think is something that I feel is very characteristic of Italy. But I think, Michele, in general, you found very sort of rich pickings in terms of who's making great wine from old vines in Italy. That's true, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, there are some wonderful producers who are making old wines sing. I mean, we have members like Feudi di San Gregorio, who also makes a fantastic Serpico from his amazing vineyards, and they're genuinely really proud of their heritage, and a lot of them really get it. make the most of everything, in the storytelling, in the safeguarding of the heritage. We've just got to get the message out loud and clear to many more, because there are so many more out there. And maybe, there are many other reasons why they don't produce a single label, because they haven't got enough vineyard hectares to make a single, so it goes into the blend. But still, they maybe some of them are not as aware as they should be. And of course, this is our job to get them all on board and to spread the message, and of course to register their wines with the old vine registry, which they are a bit lazy in doing.
Busy, they're just busy.
Pushed a bit more, but it's all a slow but gradual and good building. I think I'm very happy with that.
And could I ask, Salvino and Anselmo, do you know each other? Have you met before? Have you chatted old vines before?
I follow San Leonardo on Instagram, so I watch Anselmo's videos very regularly.
That's very kind.
And they're very informative. And
I drink your wine very often, so.
He's a tall, elegant man which you cannot miss. So I remember seeing him at Opera Wine last year in Verona. We were all running around. I recognized him from a distance, but everybody was very busy. But when I see him again, I will make sure that say hi more properly. I congratulate him a lot on the great work they're doing up there.
Thank you. Absolutely the same for me. I've been drinking Pietra Marina since I think it's been one of my top 2 or 3 favorite wines in my life. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Something that you both mentioned was that there's this almost electric quality that you kind of know it when you feel it of great old vine wine. I feel this too, and it's actually something that many wine colleagues say to me, this sense of real crackling vitality that is there in the wine. And what we've found certainly we've done this a lot in the UK, is we've organized tastings of old vine wine. And organizing these tastings is a bit like having a charm bracelet of very many different charms, in that the wines are very different in style and variety, winemaking, but yet when you thread them together, there is a sense of connection. And one of the most powerful things we have found with communicating the value of old wines is simply to get a group of great old vine wines in a room and have people taste them, enjoy them as a theme. Do you think that we can get to a point where a similar tasting could be hosted in Italy? Do you think that there's enough? I mean, I could ask you both now, would you be willing to collaborate or co-host a tasting like that? To which, of course, I think, you would attract a lot of influential figures. And is that something you would consider?
Yeah, definitely. We will contribute one wine, as you know, in the next
yes, the field trip
future, to one event. But in general, I think that old vines are such a treasure that the more awareness we can generate around these such old vines and the wines that result from them, then the better. They are a class of their own, and I believe that they deserve to be given the utmost attention. So yes, definitely you can count on us. We're very happy to join the organization recently, and we plan to be very active members.
And the same on my side, absolutely. I think that the public is always fascinated by niches of the market, let's say, and things which are not mainstream. We have seen it with all the movement of natural wines, but I would say that these go beyond natural wines, because this is something that speaks a language which you cannot recreate. It's time, and luckily you cannot purchase, or unluckily you cannot purchase time, and you cannot recreate time, you cannot industrialize time. So it's something that comes from another world, and especially from ways of training grapes and vines that were very different, and grafting vines. Well, on Etna it's fantastic that you can have still ungrafted wines. These are vines. This is absolutely stunning and amazing. But also where you had to graft them because of phylloxera, grafting was made in a very different way, probably, and with a great attention and a lot of experience, and one by one, without the use of machines, but adapting to the single plant. And this is why also some of these old plants are very resistant. I am not sure if the plants of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s will have this lifespan. Probably now we are reaching again a quality because higher selections of plants are available. Obviously, they cost more. There is much more attention given to them, but the ones which have been industrialized in such a way in the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, where the volume of planted vines has exploded, definitely will not deliver this kind of age.
Yes, it's a really good point. And what I've learned a lot over the last year or so is that regions that have been looking at old vines intensively, such as South Africa, are now using the lessons of what they've observed to actually change and inform planting now. So Rosa Kruger has led this program called Planting to Grow Old, so that you're learning the almost accidental wisdom of the past and applying it to the future in a way that isn't sentimental. It's very much about careful use of resources, resilience, and an inbuilt balance. I've got some questions from the audience that I'd like to put to you. So this is a question from Hugo Sealy. I hope that's correct in the pronunciation, Hugo. And this is for Anselmo. How does own clonal selection differ from Massal selection? I think it's the same.
It's the same.
It is the same, yeah. Yeah, I thought so too. Yeah.
A Massal selection is finding the clones, because a plant is a clone practically of its own. Obviously, if you reproduce this plant in 6,000 plants and you plant a hectare all identically, you get one very singular taste. So a Massal selection is just putting together maybe 5 or 6 different clones that you have pre-selected maybe on an old vineyard like ours, and then replanting and mixing them up so that you have, it's like having a class of people not only good all in math, but someone also good in in literature and someone good in philosophy as well. You know, it makes the entire class more interesting.
Great. We had Lara Catena yesterday, and she expressed this by having a row of vines of all of Messi, the footballer, and then another.
Exactly. Well, it's pretty much concept. Absolutely, very good.
Fantastic. Okay, Winklort asks, this is also for you, Anselmo. Is the Carmenere in San Leonardo identical genetically to the Carmenere grown in Chile?
Yes, but yes, in fact, it was discovered. I think that in Chile, it was also discovered at the very end of the 80s that it was not Merlot as it was thought to be, and recognized as Carmenere. In fact, I think that I don't remember the estate which has a 30-year-old Carmenere, which they just let's say. Well, anyways, it was a cuvée which signed the 30th anniversary of Carmenere, because it was only 30 years ago that they really found out that it was pure Carmenere. This was a couple of years ago. So it's identical. Obviously, then, you know, it depends. Probably they have selected clones, and then grafting is very important. It does make a huge difference on the final taste. You know, it depends where you plant it. And then Carmenere has an incredible, while let's say that Cabernet Sauvignon is very popular, because wherever you plant it, it delivers, I would say, 60% of very immutable character. And then obviously it has, now let's say 70% you recognize it's Cabernet, and then a 30% gives aromas and the ideas, not ideas, let's say subjective taste. Carmenère, I would say it's exactly the opposite. Depending on the altitude, and especially the latitude where it is planted, it delivers a completely different essence. For example, in San Leonardo, we have, because of the very narrow mountains, we have 3.5 hours less direct sun on the plants, and this helps us deliver a very, I would say, very linear, very delicate Cabernet. I have tasted some Cabernet from Chile, which are completely different wines. They're massive. And by the way, just to show the bottle, because maybe I hadn't had this is the Carmenère, how you see it. So it's really just the pure Carmenère as we spoke about it. Anyways, without this, so yeah, there is a very, very big difference in where you cultivate it. The result makes a huge difference on the palate.
Okay. Fantastic. And another question, this is for Salvino. How many extra man hours or woman hours are required per hectare of old vineyards in Sicily on an annual basis? I think compared
I was waiting myself. I pulled out a calculator.
In old vineyards in Etna.
Now, let's say that more or less 1 hectare requires, on average, on Etna, about 110 days of work. But some are trellised and some are bush vines. Bush vines, I would say, require much more than this average, and trellis much less. So probably a bush vine, regardless of the age, requires about 150 days of one person per year. It's a lot. And
huge amount.
Everything is done manually. Everything is done manually, and it's that's the challenge. You need a lot of work, and you need good people.
I know that one of the issues, certainly that Rosa Kruger has highlighted in South Africa, has been the importance of returning respect, training, and a kind of prestige to people who have this skill. And certainly they've been doing a lot of work in South Africa on this kind of skills training, so that there's a sense of not just increased financial reward that is then achieved by good old vine wine, but that is then put back into the chain, so that the grapes are, the grapes are commanding a higher price, and then the people who are producing the grapes are also being, basically commanding higher wages. Salvo Forti, your compatriot on Etna, is also very strong on this, and it highlights that this, if we're going to resolve this issue of shortage of skilled agricultural labor, it all comes down to the value and the kind of respect that's given to this type of work. So we've had comments from Nayan Gowda in the chat saying he's seeing across the world this is a big challenge, recruiting skilled labor. So I hope that by putting a bit more focus on the viticultural side, the wine farming, it kind of redresses that balance, or almost as the winemaker as hero, or the lead singer. And if you like the the vine growers are like they've been the drummers or the kind of in the band. But I'd like to thank you both so much for your support for the Old Vine Conference, for the amazing wines that you make, for your willingness to work together and in the community, and also thank you to my colleague Michele for your great work highlighting the Old Vine Conference to your wineries in Italy. we look forward to hearing more, and I shall be finding out when you'll be organizing the first Italian old wine tasting.
Diamoci sotto. That means let's get started in Italian.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. Thank you both. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
See you soon.
Arrivederci.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye-bye.